Welcome to Commander Central, episode 281, and today we'll be taking a look at listener Tyler Adams' Veyran, the Dirty Spell, high-powered borderline CEDH deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.
Chris, how you doing today?
I'm tired.
So you played Modern this weekend, and I stopped in the shop to buy some singles, and the last I'd heard, you were 3-0. How did the tournament go?
Well, we don't talk about what happened the next 4 rounds where my deck decided to just not play anymore. Like, it got bad. I went 3-0 right away. Felt good. Everything was in line. And then the very next game that I played, I proceeded to mulligan down to 5 in game 1. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Game 1, whatever. Game 2, mulligan down to 5 again. And I'm like, okay, this is how it's going to go. And then I proceeded to lose the next 4 rounds. And I'm like, yeah, I should not have come and done this.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
What did you end up playing? Your burn deck?
Yeah. The tables just turned and the deck just fell flat on its face, and which happens from time to time. I mean, I tried pile shuffling, I tried everything, and it was not coming together. So I was just like, okay, that's fine.
That is what it is. How did your 5-color elemental deck play that one of your friends borrowed?
He went 5-0-2. He drew round 1, and then he intentional drew round 7. And he missed top 8 and made 9th place.
Oh, did anybody locally wind up top 8ing?
No, not locally.
Okay.
A couple of people that I knew did top 8 though, because there's quite a few people out there that I knew. So,
what did the meta look like? Was it just as wide open as everyone had thought it was going to be?
Yes, there was no meta. It was. I was looking around and I'm like, what is going on here? I mean, and honestly, I should have played a different deck, knowing if I would have known that's how the meta would have been. I was expecting some top tier decks and stuff like that, but no, it was some wild. There were random rogue decks. There was old decks, and I'm like, man, if I would have played just one other deck I had built, I probably would have done much better.
Is that still kind of fun though, just seeing that much weird stuff that you're not ready for?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. I can tell a lot of people haven't played in a while because I ended up doming a guy for 10 with 2 Roiling Vortexes on the field because he pretty much thought seized me on one turn. He saw both of them, didn't take either of them. Then I proceeded to cast one, then cast another one, and then he cast Living End. And I was like, okay. I was like, are you going to cast it? And he's like, yep. And I'm like, okay, trigger, because you're casting it for 0 mana, take 10 damage. And he's like, from what? And I showed him the cards that were on the battlefield for 3 turns, where he didn't read them. And he's just like, what is that? And I'm just like, oh, man. I was just like, yeah, people have not been playing in a long time. Okay, I see what's going on here.
Yeah, for sure. That is definitely something that happens. You get pretty rusty when you're not playing a person like that.
Yeah. Once I got up towards the top tables, though, that's when I saw more people who have been playing and stuff like that. So it felt more like real games. So
cool. Is there anything else coming up for modern events for you, or is there you're now on a hiatus again for a while?
I'm on a hiatus for right now because the next modern event that comes up will be the end of August, and that's at our store. It's a 1K tournament that we usually hold once a month. But I'm camping that weekend, so I already have plans. I've had it planned for a month with a couple other people. I got one of the people who I travel with for playing too. He's going with me, so 2 of us won't be there.
Okay. Well, I will quick, since we're talking about playing games, I did have a funny one that happened last night. Actually, I was playing a game on stream with one of our listeners, Fitz, and Rachel Weeks, who's on the CAG, was playing, and she was playing an Octavia Living Thesis deck, who was it's a mono blue octopus.
Yep.
And I think it's 8 blue to cast, but it costs 1 less for each instant or sorcery in your graveyard. And she began the game. She's like, "Yeah, it takes a while to get Octavia out. It's much more difficult to get all those in your graveyard than you would think it would be." I'm like, "Yeah, it can be."
She probably does it on turn 2, I bet you.
turn 1, she plays Island or something in past, whatever. It came around. Everyone had turn 2. The green player goes to ramp with a Nature's Lore, and the third player had a dual caster mage and flashed it in to copy the Nature's Lore just to get the ramp effect.
Yep.
And then she's like, Brain Freeze, which is an old spell that has Storm.
Oh, no.
It just mills you through. It mills you 3.
I think it mills target, or mills a player.
It's a target player. Okay.
Yep.
So she hit herself, and it was just like instant sorcery, instant sorcery, instant. And she's like,
oh no.
And then it's her turn. She's like, Octavia, but she was able to drop on turn 2.
I would have looked at her and been like,
"What do you do?"
Yeah, I would have just looked at her and been like, "So, do we need to have a talk about power level of deck here? What's going on?"
I mean, and it was like just the absolute perfect confluence of events. She could have, that could have easily been 5 lands in there. It just, how often do you see somebody copy someone's turn 2 Nature's Lore or something? It was just like the absolute perfect play. But yeah, she was able to drop Octavia out on like turn 2. It was crazy.
Oh.
And then Octavia has Ward 8, I believe. And we were at a point later on in the game where I didn't have a removal spell, but I did have like a disenchant effect. And I also had liquid metal coating out. It's like, I'll turn Octavia into an artifact. And then I can just disenchant it or whatever spell it was I had in hand to get it out of play. And I had the 8 mana to pay for the disenchant.
You didn't have it for the other one, though.
But I didn't have liquid metal coating. I'm like, I can pay 8, but I can't pay 16 to use the abilities. So yeah, that didn't work either.
Oh, that's so horrible. You need something that would just like turn off all abilities.
That's what I was,
effect or something.
And I did have a Polymorphous Jest in the deck, but I just, I didn't have it out, obviously, because that would have at least eliminated the ward, and then I could have got through. But it happens. What are you going to do? If you're going to lose a game, it should be to something that's an interesting story, and that was definitely a funny story.
Oh, I probably would have cried. I would have been like, turn 2, really? I can't do anything about this.
And, same game, I did get to kill somebody with my SCR bird that I had suited up because the player before me played a Furnace of Wrath, and then it came to me, and I dropped Inquisitor's Flail, which also doubles damage dealt, and a Colossus Hammer. So I was able to equip up the bird and turn him into like a 16/16, which because of the Furnace of Wrath was going to go to 32/32, which would double off the Inquisitor's Flail to 64 damage. I was able to actually hit the player for 64 SCR damage on a swing off his own Furnace of Wrath.
That's not fair.
Yeah, right. And then in the same game, there's that new item from the Forgotten Realm set, the Ever Full Purse, that you play and you can tap it. Spend 1 mana, tap it, and roll a 4-sided die, and you get treasure tokens equal to whatever the die roll is. He played it, rolled his die, and got 1 token. Passes the next person who rolled on their turn, untapped it, used it, got 4 treasures.
Oh no.
It passed over to the next person who also rolled a 4 and then went to me and I rolled the 3 on it. She's like, yeah, so I spent 4 mana casting this and got 1 treasure and gave my opponents 11.
That's so not good.
Yeah. It's like that math doesn't work out. So that was a pretty funny card. He's like, that card's coming out.
Yeah, those are the cards that we discuss quite a bit, where it helps your opponents too much. And yes, while it is random, I still don't know if I'd want that randomness to go around the table.
It's also one of those things I feel like that, again, it made for a good story and it made for one good story. And okay, I'm good. I've got my good story out of it and I'm just not going to play it anymore.
Yeah, unless you're in a themed deck where all you're going to be doing is rolling dice the whole time, so you need all those triggers or whatever, I don't know if I'd play that one.
Yeah, I tend to think the same. So if you out there in listener land want to reach out to us and tell us about any fun games you played, how'd you go about doing that, Chris?
Well, you can find us on a multitude of social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter at CMDR Central. You can search us up on Facebook, CMDR Central. You can find us on YouTube by searching CMDR Central, and you can find us online at cmdrcentral.com.
You can also find us at patreon.com/CMDR Central, where you can sign up for a variety of rewards, including a Decks You Play episode like we're about to do right now for listener Tyler Adams.
Indeed.
And we have a couple of giveaways going on this month. On Twitter, you can like or retweet to have a chance to win a Chandra playmat. And for Patreon supporters, we will be giving away a copy of the board game Heroes of Dominaria at the end of the month. So if you're a Patreon supporter at the end of the month of August, you will be entered in a chance to win that game. And both of those things, the playmat and the game, were provided to us by listener Andrew Nolan. So thank you very much, Andrew. We appreciate that.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so should we jump in here, Chris, and take a look at Tyler's Veyran deck?
Sure. A little bit out of my wheelhouse, but sure.
Yeah, and same to me as well. I usually don't play at this power level, so we will do the best we can. But it is an interesting deck. We usually don't look at things like this, so it's a nice kind of change of pace. Max always takes care of sending out a list of questions to people for these Decks You Play episodes, and Tyler sent us her answers back. So Chris, why don't you take us away here?
All right, so the first question we always ask is, we need to know what the meta's like, because we need to know where we tweak the deck, how to go. And obviously, from looking at the deck, the meta seems to be high-powered for the most part. But we were told that it does vary. And we were told that this is his more high-power borderline CDH deck. The meta varies from precons to probably 9s, and he personally feels like this deck is pretty tight list, and he'd love to hear feedback on it, and if there's anything cool or old that he may have missed.
The goal of the deck is to pump up Veyran for commander damage with some evasion, or to use some of the many triggers from cards like Gutter Snipe or Firebrand Archer effects to burn the table down. There's also an Aetherflux Reservoir as a secondary win condition.
Indeed. The next one is, what are the main weaknesses of the deck? We need to know where we plug in cards, what we need to take stuff out, and we were told, card draw is probably the biggest weakness in the deck. If you can't get card draw on board, then the deck kind of just sits there and flutters a little bit. But if you can, then, it's set up and you can get a lock on and, smash everyone in the face with the commander. So that's what we need to help with. Now, for budget for everything, the budget limit is nothing over $120 for a single card. But on a side note, we were told that there are, it is in the works of getting a volcanic island and a Wheel of Fortune. So see what we can do with that. Maybe we can plug those things in there. Finally, another weakness that popped into his head, at the end of what he wrote to us, is that there might not be enough evasion, which is something we could take a look at.
Sure. There's a couple of cards he's been considering, things like Teferi's Ageless Insight, maybe Possibility Storm and Runaway Steamkin. And last is, I love your content, hope to one day meet up at Magic Fest and play some games. You are all awesome. So thank you very much. We appreciate the compliment, and hopefully we'll have events maybe firing off in 2022, and we can do that. We can see this deck in person.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Veyran, Voice of Duality, 3 mana, 1, a blue and a red for a 2/2 Efreet Wizard. Veyran has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, Veyran gets +1/+1 until end of turn, and if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So essentially, any spell you cast gives Veyran +2/+2. It says +1/+1, but it triggers twice.
I love how they put that wording on there where it's just, well, how about this? And then we'll just add this, so then it just contradicts what we just said on it. So.
Yep, exactly. So Tyler has his deck broken up into categories, and rather than reorder it and just talk about the individual, lands, creatures, sorceries, instants, and I guess there's some of that here, but we're going to use the categories he has listed just to kind of shake things up. However, the first category he has here is lands. There's only 25 lands in this deck right now.
That's really small.
Yeah, although it has a relatively low CMC for the deck, 2.36, so you can get away with that a little bit. There's a lot of things that cost, 1 or 2 mana here. It's lighter than I would like to run, for sure. When I think of like a super lean CEDH deck, I'm thinking 28 or 29 maybe. 25 seems super low, but if it works, it works. I've never played it, so maybe that's enough.
Yep.
The land list is, there's a Cascade Bluffs, that's one of the old filter lands from the Orwin set, a City of Brass, a Command Tower, Emergence Zone, that is a land that taps for colorless, or you can spend 1 to sack it, and you can cast spells as though they had flash this turn. There's 8 islands, 7 mountains, a Mana Confluence, a River Glide Pathway, that's one of the MDFC lands, Steam Vents, a Strip Mine and a Wasteland to deal with problem lands, and a Training Center, which is one of the Battle Bond style lands that comes into play untapped if you have 2 or more opponents.
Yep.
Okay, so other than neither of us would be comfortable playing with 25 lands, but we'll assume that number probably works for him, I guess. And there's a volcanic island going in here, and we will just, for argument's sake, because there's 8 islands and 7 mountains, we'll just say that that's going to replace one of the islands, giving 7 of each basic.
Sure.
Is there anything that you like or dislike, or that you would change in the land base here, Chris?
Well, first thing I would do is add, I was doing the math on this too. Let me come back to this. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, more like 5 actual mana rocks in the deck. So I would either add a few more mana rocks, or I would add a couple more lands into the deck just to even it out. I did playtest this deck a few times. Took a few, opening hands, because this deck is posted on Archideck, so hey, you have the playtest feature. And I always hit usually about 2 lands every game, which wasn't a huge issue per se with how the curve goes. But honestly, I think I want to jam more spells than that. And in a high power level setting, because I have played really high power level CEDH before, you still need the land base, because you need to start jamming, multiple upon multiple spells as the game goes on in order to keep that advantage high and win. Mm-hmm. So I would add a few more lands, and pretty much the lands that I would add right away are all the duels. like your Shivan Reef, Sulphur Falls, Fiery Islet, any of them that come into play untapped that create both colors of mana, so you're never struggling to find that other color of mana.
I think especially Shivan Reef and Fiery Islet, they're just always untapped. There's no question. Like
Yes.
even the check lands, you can occasionally get in a situation where they don't come into play tapped. And in this kind of deck, I get why you're running Mana Confluence instead of Brass, because you just don't care about life loss. Odds are when you lose, it's not because someone's chipped you down. You lose because someone hits you with something giant or someone combos out. So in that case, like the life loss to Shivan Reef and Fire Islet is just not really relevant for the most part. And I would much rather have those in play, even over Riverglide Pathway. Like if you were insisting on keeping the amount of basics you have and had to make a change, just put a land in that's always going to be untapped and always makes you both. The MDFC lands you still have to choose, and you just want to have access to all your colors all the time. So those are the two I would for sure find a slot for, I think. And if he was going to stay at 25, I would swap one of them for Riverglide, I think.
Exactly. I agree with that too. Like Cascade Bluffs is another one that always catches me a little bit, because I do believe you need the colored mana to do it. So if you get stuck on a opening hand of Cascade Bluffs in a colorless land, then you're just kind of like, ugh. So we got to, be careful with the colorless. You are only running 3 of them. So don't jam too many more in per se, unless you're going to tweak how everything else plays.
Yeah, totally agree. So that's really what I had. I mean, again, I don't want to, like, if this was someone's a little more casual deck and they were at 33 lands, I might say bump up to 34 or 35. But I'm just not someone who plays at this kind of level, and maybe that works. It's just less than I would like to run, but, that is what it is.
Yes.
There's one Planeswalker in this deck, and it's Narset Parter of Veils.
Yep.
If you're going to run one Planeswalker, that's a pretty good Planeswalker. I mean,
that each opponent really good.
It's 2 blue and a colorless, so 3 total for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, which is nuts. The most important part here is each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. That's just opponents, too. And she has -2 look at the top 4 cards of your library, and you can reveal a non-creature card from among them and put it into your hand, and the rest go on the bottom. So there's also a kind of a filtering effect you can do here once you get it into play to, find a few lands or a few useful draw spells. I get this is the kind of deck that runs Narset if you're in blue. Like, you have blue, so you play Narset because it's just fantastic in this kind of environment.
Yeah, you kind of have to.
Yeah. The only other Planeswalker I would suggest maybe running here is Jessica Thrice Reborn. And the reason was he talked about how this deck cares about trying to dome someone with commander damage.
Okay.
Jessica just makes that so much easier. Yes, each instant or sorcery spell you cast buffs up Veyran +2/+2 basically, but that still means, there's a long way you have to get to lethal commander damage on somebody. That's a lot of spells in a single turn. If you have Jessica out and you are able to triple that damage, that makes that way easier. Yes, she costs 3 mana, but that's going to do a lot more work than 3 or 4 instant spells just to buff up your commander. It's gonna shortcut a lot.
Yeah, the which one am I thinking of? It's one of the Ral Planeswalkers from the newer set. I think it's War of the Spark, or what's the other one? One of the Ravnica sets. He's red and blue, and I know that when you cast an instant or sorcery, he deals 1 damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. Yeah, there he is. Scry 1 for his +2, but his -2 you can. Your next instant or sorcery spell that you cast this turn, you get to copy that, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So 4 mana for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker that when you cast, you just automatically deal damage, might be something to consider as well.
Yeah, that could do work here. I actually ran it in my Kedis and Crom deck for a little while. The problem I found, and it wasn't really a problem, it just wasn't always great, whereas you don't play Jessica and not really have a chance to kill somebody, at least when I played her. It was just always good every single time. So that's why if I was going to add one more, it would definitely be Jessica, but Ral's real solid as well.
All right, so the next one that we're going to jump into are finishers, and there are 4 finishing cards in the deck. We have Aetherflux Reservoir, Chandra's Ignition, Distortion Strike, and Sentinel Tower. I'm assuming Distortion Strike is just because of evasion type purposes to make Veyran unblockable. Plus then Veyran gets, let's see, so +1, +0, so +3, +2. But it also has rebound. And then Sentinel Tower, whenever an instant or sorcery spell is cast during your turn, Sentinel Tower deals damage to any target equal to 1 plus the number of instant or sorcery spells that you cast before the spell. No, that were cast, so it's not even you. So that's pretty good. And everyone knows Aetherflux Reservoir and Chandra's Ignition, or at least I hope you do, because they're just, higher CMC cards that just go blam, stop this or die.
Yes, especially in this deck. Yeah, Reservoir is a great backup plan. So Sentinel Tower. The Sorcery Strike is letting you poke through for that lethal damage. Yeah, Chandra's Ignition makes sense too. There's a couple here, and I guess you could have called Jessica a finisher here as well. Some of these categories, there's a lot of overlap.
Yep.
There's a couple cards, though, here that I think that I run in my Kedison Crown deck that plays kind of similar to this, that I think would do a lot of good here as finishers. And they all function kind of the same way. There's Overblaze, that's 3 in a red for an instant. There is Rush of Blood, that's 2 in a red for an instant. And there's Unleash Fury, that's 1 in a red, also an instant. The wording is a little different. Unleash Fury just doubles the power of target creature till end of turn. Rush of Blood, target creature gets +X+O till end of turn, where X is its power, so it functionally doubles its power, but it's worded differently. And Overblaze, each time a permanent would deal damage to a creature or player this turn, it deals double that damage to a creature or player instead. So they all kind of do the same thing. They double a creature. Yes, you can cast a bunch of instants or sorceries in this deck and give Veyran +2/+2 every time. Casting things we'll talk about in a few minutes, like Expedite or Ponder or whatever. That's really nice. You need to cast a bunch of those, though, to get Veyran's power up. If you chain off 6 of those spells in a turn, Veyran gets +12/+12 and it's hitting for 14. That's really good. If you cast one spell, let's say you cast a Ponder, that's going to take Veyran to 4, and then if you cast an Overblaze or an Unleash Fury or whatever, Veyran's going to go to 6 from you casting that spell, and then it's going to get doubled to 12. So like, just casting one of those spells and one additional spell, which is 2 spells, gets you to the same point you'd get to if you were casting 6 spells, basically, just using Veyran's ability. And if you want to cast one of those spells after you've cast 4 and you've taken Veyran up to like a 10, then she's going up to a 24 then. Those damage doublers that red has, and those 3 are the 3 easiest to cast in this kind of deck, are going to do a ton of work and are going to shortcut the requirement for you to be able to cast 6 spells a turn, which is going to be sometimes difficult unless you've drawn a ton of cards.
Yes.
So yeah, those are ones I would really consider here as kind of finishers, because the way those damage doublers stack with this ability, just by casting it, she's going to get +2/+2 and then get her damage doubled. It's just really strong. So those are the 3 main additions I had to finishers, were Overblaze and a Rush of Blood and Unleash Fury. I do think those cards would be really good in this deck.
Yes.
The next category we have here is Ramp, and we did kind of merge this with artifacts because there's artifacts in Ramp and there's Ramp and there are 2 artifacts categories. So I'm just going to read all of them.
Okay.
There's an Arcane Signet, which everyone knows. There's Bergi, God of Storytelling. That's a legendary god, 2 in a red for a 3/3. Whenever you cast a spell, add red until end of turn. You don't lose this mana. And creatures you control can boast twice during your turns, but that's probably not relevant here. So basically, you're adding a red whenever you cast a spell.
And this is one of the few decks you'll actually see Bergi played as Bergi and not played as the Horn.
Exactly. And it makes sense here. It I guess kind of functionally reduces the casting cost of all your spells by 1 red mana because you get a red back. So that's really good here. There's a Chrome Mox, a really good fast rock. Dockside Extortionist, crazy powerful card, is going to make a ton of ramp here. Jessica's Will, you add a red for each card in target opponent's hand, and or exile the top 3 cards of your library, and you can play them till end of turn, and if you have your commander out, you do both. Mana Crypt, again, crazy strong rock. There's a Seething Song, which is 3 mana for an instant, and you add 5 red mana to your mana pool, so it's a red ritual. There's a Soul Ring, Stormkiln Artist, which is 4 mana, and it gets +1/+0 for each artifact you control, which is not that big of a deal here, but it also has Magecraft. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a treasure token. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, So yeah, for doing the thing you're doing, you're going to make free treasures.
Yep.
There's Swiftfoot Boots to give a creature haste and hexproof, and there's Talisman of Creativity, which is, a really good mana rocket, 2 mana.
Sure is.
All right, Chris, what do you think of the ramp/artifact category? Anything you like or dislike or would add or remove?
Honestly, if I had to choose, and I know it's hard because this is, upwards of the CEDH, but this is really color-intensive deck, I'd probably cut the Mana Crypt. I mean, it's hard to say it that way. I'd rather have colored mana if I had to choose.
If you had to pull something out, you would pull the Mana Crypt?
Yeah. I mean, it is hard to say in this type of, setting of what you're trying to do, but with how much mana, like the colored pip intensity that the deck requires, because they're 1 and 2 CMC cards.
Sure.
Kind of would want to, but then again, I don't know. Like when I was playtesting, I never ended up drawing Crypt, so I don't know how it actually plays in the deck.
So here's one thing I would say. We didn't mention it under lands, but there isn't an Ancient Tomb in this deck.
Yes.
And usually I figure if your deck is good enough or can use the mana from Crypt, it can use it from Ancient Tomb. And if you can't use it from Ancient Tomb, you're probably not using it from Crypt. Usually, particularly in a powerful deck, those go hand in hand. I'm not running Mana Crypt in my Edric deck. I'm also not running Ancient Tomb for the same reason, because I just don't very often have a use for that much colorless mana. Two of them simultaneously. I oftentimes can't use one in the deck, but two I definitely can't, so I'm not running either. So it's been my experience, at least in these high power decks, if you can use the mana from one, you can use it from both or not. So, but like I said, I don't play it. I don't know. Maybe it is enough. I'm just not sure, but I could see that for sure.
Yeah, because like so at our shop we used to play competitive 1v1 format with Commander, and we actually made our own ban list, and we banned all the fast mana rocks like that, the Crypt, the Vault, all that stuff, and it did not change the power level of decks.
It didn't.
No.
Those games still ended like turn 5 or 6 pretty frequently.
Yes. It was just all about tuning stuff, like, so Mana Crypt, while it is a powerful card, it's not a necessity in a deck.
Sure. The big thing that jumped out at me here, so there's a Ruby Medallion in this deck. Ruby Medallion is 2 mana rock. It's not really a rock. It's 2 mana, and it says red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So I went through and counted. There's 19 spells in this deck, counting the commander, that are red and that also have a colorless pip in the cost. So like it doesn't do any good to have a Ruby Medallion out if you are casting a lightning bolt, because it's just 1 red in the cost. There's nothing to reduce there.
Yep.
So it needs to have a colorless pip in the cost, like Seething Song, for example, is 2 in a red, so it would reduce it to 1 in a red. I went through and counted, including the commander, there are 19 spells here that you can reduce the cost on with Ruby Medallion. There is not, however, a Sapphire Medallion in the deck, which does the same thing for blue spells. And there are 22 blue spells with a colorless pip in the mana cost. Now, I'm not 100% certain 19 is enough, or even 22 is enough to justify a Medallion versus like just running some other kind of mana rock in those slots. I think that's the kind of thing you have to play to get a feel for. I don't think a hard and fast number. If you have 30 spells, it's good enough. Or if you, whatever. I don't know if there's any definitive number. I think you just have to play it and get a feel for it. However, if Ruby Medallion is good enough, then Sapphire Medallion definitely isn't. And if Sapphire Medallion isn't good enough, then I don't think Ruby is, because it affects less spells. So I think that's a situation where if you're going to have Ruby, you should have Sapphire, and if you don't have Sapphire, you shouldn't have Ruby.
Yeah. If you're going to cut the Ruby, I would slap in, an Izzet Signet then. I mean, easy straight up swap, 2 mana to 2 mana, but you actually are creating mana out of it, so.
Yeah, because there's probably not enough artifacts in here to justify a Mox Opal. And I don't know how fast you're trying to get your commander out, so I'm not sure if Jeweled Amulet makes sense here. If your commander isn't out, Mox Amber isn't doing you any good, so...
If Mox Diamond wasn't so expensive, it would be one that I would suggest, but that just keeps going up in price.
Exactly. So, yeah, if you had the budget or you're playing proxies, Mox Diamond would probably work really well.
Yes.
So that was the main thing that jumped out at me for the Mana Rocks, was the medallions and the artifacts here as well. I would run one or the other. The other thing I was unsure about is Swiftfoot Boots. The hexproof is nice. I don't know how useful the haste is. There's not a ton of creatures that attack in this deck, and in order for Veyran to do a Veyran thing, I don't know how. Like, let's say you're recasting Veyran on later on in the game. Do you have enough mana to cast other spells to get Veyran up high enough to kill somebody that the haste matters? Maybe, but I'm not entirely sure it's going to matter that much. So I'm wondering if something like Veilstone Amulet wouldn't do the job just as well. Veilstone Amulet is 3 mana, not 2, but you don't have to equip it. And it just says whenever you play a spell, creatures you control can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control this turn.
That's really good.
So it functionally turns any removal spell aimed at Veyran into a counter spell. Or it turns any of your spells into a counter spell. Someone goes to remove Veyran, because I'm assuming the boots are going to be on Veyran every single time. Someone goes to remove Veyran, you just cast your Gitaxian Probe and it turns it into a counter spell. There's a couple advantages there. Number one, it's tempting. Like, people are going to take a shot at it, and you can punish them for it. Like, if Swiftfoot Boots are on, they're just like, well, I can't deal with that until Swifties are gone. If you have a Veilstone Amulet, they're like, well, I'll take a chance and see if I can sneak this Pondify through, and boom, it gets countered because you cast a draw spell, which can be pretty crippling for your opponents when they have to waste resources to try to sneak something through when you have an answer. So, again, I don't know how useful the haste is here. I would bet it's not that useful, but maybe I'm wrong. If it isn't, I would try something like Veilstone Amulet over Swiftfoot Boots, just because it lets you get away with like not having to have equipment there that you re-equip whenever you recast your commander, and you can use it for all your creatures versus just one of them.
Yeah.
That's really all I had for that category.
There's like two other ones. I can't think of the name of the one. The other one's Primal Amulet. While, yes, it costs 4 mana, it does reduce all instant and sorcery spells, so that could be another one that, swaps in for the medallion or whatever. But then when it flips, and I do believe it needs 4 or more charge
spells.
Counters. Yep.
Yeah.
It flips, then you can cast, it's add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and then whenever that is used to cast an instant or sorcery spell, you copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So it's an, easy, free copy cheat thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one to consider. Plus, it is also flipping into a land, so that could be somewhat in your land base as well. So the other one that I was considering, aside from the Primal Amulet, was Rod of Absorption. It is 2 colorless and a blue for an artifact that says, whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, exile it instead of putting it into a graveyard as it resolves. Now, for X and tap, sacrifice Rod of Absorption. You may cast any number of spells from among the cards exiled with Rod of Absorption with total mana cost X or less without paying their mana costs. Now, this thing I really, really like in a deck like this where you're relying on that, you're relying on the Magecraft triggers, all that other stuff, but it also reads whenever a player, so it doesn't count you, it counts other players. Right. So you can cast their stuff too if I'm reading this correctly. Because it says you can
I believe so.
You can just cast them, with X or less without paying their mana cost. Not to mention that you get to exile their stuff, so if playing in a CEDH format, that prevents their recursion as well, while it's also just benefiting you.
Yeah, that's a card where, like, we talked about it when we did a little bit of a review. I've never seen it in play, but I also feel like I could see that card being really, really strong. I just haven't actually seen it get used ever yet. Yeah,
me neither. It sounds really good, though. I mean, especially with recursion, like, say, in the mid-game to the late game, like, Veyran's been killed once, or you're, fluttering around because you don't have that card draw. This card right here, just sitting there, if no one's packing removal to get rid of something like this, you just, okay, I'm going to crack it for 4, and I'm going to cast all these 1 and 2 mana, things out of here, and just go ham and then kill you with the Veyran.
Exactly. The last thing I would kind of maybe throw out there, there's a Seething Song in here, and it's kind of a perfect deck for that kind of thing because you're getting more mana than you put into it, you're casting a spell that's basically putting you mana ahead and buffing your commander by +2/+2. That's really, really good. I would also be tempted to do Mana Geyser here, which adds mana to your mana pool for each tapped land your opponents control. It costs 5 and not 3, so it's tougher to come out ahead. But I've never not come out ahead on a Mana Geyser 2. And it's the same thing. It's just going to put you ahead mana while buffing your commander at the same time. And sometimes it puts you way ahead. Like I've done Mana Geyser and gotten 8 out of it before, but I've done Mana Geyser and got like 22 before as well.
Yes. Yeah, those cards I kind of shy away from any of the rituals in this type of format. Just because they are one-ofs and, they don't do enough built into themselves. But whereas Mana Geyser, I like that because the ceiling is so high for that card.
Yeah.
Whereas the floor, worst case, you're going to cast it. It's 5 mana, isn't it, to cast, I do believe?
Yeah, yep.
So if you can't net back the 5, then it's not worth it to cast it.
Yeah.
So you have that low floor, but, really high ceiling for it.
Yeah. And yes, it's a sorcery and Seething Song is an instant, but I have a feeling in this deck, you're not using Seething Song as an instant very often because you're wanting to do it on your turn when you can bust your commander up. I mean, I guess instant is still somewhat relevant on your own turn, but not nearly as, it's much less of a downside having Mana Geyser be a sorcery because I think most of the time you're going to be casting Seething Song at the same point you would cast a sorcery because you're going to be using it to roll your commander up.
Yes.
So anyway, that's one I would probably consider here as well. So let's move on to creatures. There's 11 creatures here. There's Baral, Chief of Compliance. Baral is going to primarily be used to reduce the cost of instant and sorcery spells, but whenever you counter something, you draw a card as well. It's just a logical card here in this deck. There's Electrostatic Field. That's a wall that says whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and that's 1 in red to cast, so just an extra kind of gutter snipe effect here. Firebrand Archer, something similar. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Goblin Electromancer is a cost reducer. Instant and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. We mentioned Gutter Snipe. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. There's a Hull Breacher here, which is not legal.
Banhammer!
Yep. So I'm guessing that will come out for probably something we suggested here. Jori N Ruin Diver. That's 3 mana for a Merfolk Wizard. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, draw a card. And in this deck, I would imagine that's pretty frequent. There is Kedis, Emberclaw Familiar, which is a partner that I run with my Crom deck to always have access to it. Here, it's just you hope you draw it. But whenever a commander you control deals combat damage to an opponent, it deals it to each opponent. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of ways to tutor up creatures in these colors, because that would be a target I would say you would probably go for the vast majority of the time just to have the ability to kill everyone instead of one person.
Agreed.
Being able to, because my Kedis and Crom deck was originally an Adelaide's deck that played kind of similar to this, and being able to always have access to that way to hit everybody simultaneously made a huge difference in that deck. There's Krark the Thumbless. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you flip a coin, and if you lose it, you return the spell to its owner's hand, and if you win it, you copy that spell. In this deck, you kind of don't care if you lose that coin flip. Maybe you want to lose it sometimes because you're going to get this cast a spell again. All you care about is the cast triggers.
Yep.
If you're casting a Surum Visions, whatever, you don't care if you get it bounced back to your hand. Talrand Sky Summoner, just to make Drakes all the spells you're already casting, and a Wandering Archaic, which is a pretty common CEDH card these days. Whenever an opponent casts an instant sorcery spell, they may pay 2, but if they don't, you copy that spell. So it's just a crazy value card.
I finally got my full art foil that I'm jamming in my Mogus deck. I hope everyone's ready.
Yeah, you do a lot of taxing in that deck. That makes sense there.
Well, it's also the protection, because it's like, oh, I'm going to cast this to, destroy all your enchantments or something. It's like, well, I think I don't know if I want to do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anything you would add or remove here from the creatures, Chris?
Well, first thing I would remove is Hull Breacher, because that card just got banned so
Yes.
hard, so fast.
Yes, indeed.
I'm assuming the deck hasn't been updated since then type of deal. The one creature that popped into my head, and it's not very good, but it's definitely always fun to play with, is Young Pyromancer. Just because you're playing the instant and sorcery route, so you can just get a whole bunch of tokens on the field. Which, if you're playing against a creature deck, you can block with them, or it just gives you another outlet to start swinging in for extra little chip damage to end up, because if you can't hit the 21 commander damage, you might be able to just chip away at life total, so that could be an option too.
Yeah, and there's a couple other, there's a Talrand in here. There's a couple other variations on Talrand that you can run here that make creatures when you cast spells. There's Docent of Perfection that is going to make a 1/1 blue wizard when you cast something, or Murmuring Mystic that makes birds. I'm not sure if I would add either of those, but if Talrand's good enough, those are at least an option.
Yeah, that also leads to the 3-mana Planeswalker from War of the Spark that's uncommon, that I do believe when you cast an instant or a non-creature spell, you create a 1/1 servo. So, I mean, if you want to go that route, you could add that as well. It was hard to find, extremely amazing card draw to put in here type of deal, so.
Yeah, and the creature thing too, because there's a few I tried. Again, my Kedis and Crom deck is kind of similar to this. I ran Backdraft Hellkite for a while. Whenever it attacks, each instant sorcery card in your graveyard gets flashback. It was fine, but it was never that great. I found I would just rather run a twin cast or something to copy a spell was just easier and more consistent than that. Once in a while it was crazy strong, but it just wasn't consistent enough. God Eternal Kefnet is 2 blue for a 4/5. Whenever you reveal the first card you draw each turn as you draw it, and whenever you reveal an instant or sorcery card, you copy that card and may cast the copy for 2 colorless less, and that still goes into your hand. So let's say you draw a Ponder or something, you can spend a blue to cast that Ponder, or to cast a copy of the Ponder, and then put the Ponder back in your hand.
Yep.
That has been good enough in my Kedis and Crom deck, so maybe it would be good enough here. So that would be one I would consider as well. Unlike Backdraft Hellkite, that one was consistent enough to be happy with.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few other, decent creatures that could go in here, and I'm thinking,
Sure.
Modern decks I've played against, you have DRC, Dragon Rage Channeler. You have the Sprite Dragons. You have stuff like that care about that Snapcaster Mage. I mean, stuff like that. I'm not sure if they're technically good for this deck.
Yeah.
The one that I like the most is probably Dragon Rage Channeler, because whenever you cast that non-creature spell, you get to surveil. So you can start pitching cards that you don't want to go digging down for whatever you need type of deal, but it's not a scry. And I'm not sure how much the graveyard really fits in. And then you got to think about graveyard, themes to add to it. So, I mean, it's always hit or miss exactly which way to suggest to go to.
Exactly. So we have card advantage draw here, and again, there's just a lot of weird overlap. Obviously Jury End is a draw spell, or going to work that way in this deck, but there's 20 of these. There's a lot of cantrips too, things like do a thing and draw you a card, because all you care about is giving your creature +2/+2, and if it replaces itself, that's great. So there's things like Accelerate that do that. There's Archmage Emeritus, which is a creature, could have been in the creature category, but it's mostly going to be a draw here whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Brainstorm, obviously really consistent. Expedite, whenever you draw a card and you cast it and a creature gains haste. That's mostly, again, here to give a creature +2/+2 and replace itself. Fire and Ice lets you tap a permanent to draw a card for 1 in a blue, which is probably the mode that gets used the most often. Similarly, it's just a way to buff your creature and replace itself. Fleeting Distraction, same thing. You draw a card and give a creature -1/-0. Gataxian Probe, you can cast for no mana to look at target player's hand and draw a card. You just got to pay 2 life in Phyrexian mana for that. Leadership Vacuum, target player returns each commander they control from the battlefield to the command zone and you draw a card. That's 2 and a blue. There's a Mystic Remora, ridiculously good card here. An Opt, Overmaster, an old red card, 1 red, and next instant or sorcery spell you play this turn can't be countered, and you draw a card. Again, probably primarily here just to proc the Veyran ability. There's a Ponder, Quick Change, you just change the color of a creature and draw a card. Used for Veyran again. Renegade Tactics, target creature can't block when you draw a card. Serum Visions, you draw a card and scry 2. Sleight of Hand, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand and one in the bottom for a single blue mana. Tezzeret's Gambit, you can cheat some life, or pay some life to cheat some costs here, so you can just pay 3 colorless to draw 2 cards and proliferate. Thrill of Possibility, you discard a card as additional cost and draw 2. Valakut Awakening is kind of a mini wheel for yourself. You can put a number of cards from your hand in the bottom of your library and draw that many +1. And last but not least, Windfall, where each player discards his or her hand and draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So, this kind of broad category of card to draw and advantage, Chris, what are you thinking here?
I like it, but I don't like it at the same time.
Sure.
Because, quite a few of these cards don't quite do enough. Like, yes, they give haste and all that stuff, so then Veyran becomes a 4/4 when he casts that spell. All that fun jazz. I'd rather see, it's hard really, because I'm thinking of the Storm decks that we used to play for 1v1 Commander, and a lot of them were like 1 mana blue cantrip spells, but we were building a Storm count to knock someone out. So, honestly, with like the Aetherflux Reservoir and stuff like that too in here, maybe put in some cards that are like Peak or Quicken or stuff like that give you the card draw plus, something else as well. I'm not sure if I like the haste effects per se. I like how you were talking, Dana, about how maybe just take the turn off after you cast Veyran to sit back. You have a bunch of counter magic, which we'll get to, that it will protect, and then you can go ham with the other cards that are just going to keep fueling and going higher and higher and higher.
Yeah, I understand the thought process of things like Accelerate or Quick Change, where, hey, I'm only going to spend 2 mana and it's going to give Veyran +2/+2 and I will draw a card. And I guess at least Accelerate buffs up your commander, or gives it haste, and even if I think that isn't a big deal, it's something. The Quick Change does nothing really. Changes the creature's color to a color of your choice and you draw a card. That's just not anything that's ever useful. I would just rather draw 2 cards there. Like, yes, that can draws you a single card, but like I would much rather run a Winged Words or a Expressive Iteration from Strixhaven that's a really good card for 2 mana, and it's going to basically functionally put 2 cards in your hand as well. I would rather like run just a couple pure draw spells that might cost slightly more, but are always going to put you cards ahead, because you're going to run out of card. Like, this is putting you cards down. It's replacing itself, but you're spending mana. There's just a cap of how much you can do each turn. And I think also if you run a few of those damage doublers, like I suggested before, as finishers, it's less spells you need to cast per turn. So you can get away with then, I think, having a few more of those draw spells, a few more things that actually put you cards up versus just replacing themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
Chart a course even, or things of that nature.
Is it charm? There's a bunch of things like that in this color combination that are, they were created quite a while ago that do, functionally draw 2 cards, pump your creature to a 4/4, then you have more cards to cast to do the stuff like that.
Yeah, and if all you care about is the draw a card thing, there's things like Quicken. The next sorcery spell you cast can be cast as Head Flash.
Yep.
Like, that's going to be more useful, I think, than the things like the one that changes the colors of your creature. Quick change.
Agreed.
Like, Quicken number 1 costs 1 less, but like that's going to be a more useful ability in general than just changing something's color.
Yeah, because I was thinking like for the Overmaster one, I was thinking of Peak, because I do believe Peak is instant speed for 1 blue. Yes, it doesn't prevent the counter, but you can look at, opponent's hand and then draw a card. So then you can know if you can even get through, or you can just get into a counter war, which, you could win that counter war. Plus your Veyron's huge then, and then you come through and just like, well, you wanted to counter with me, and now I'll just kill you instead.
Yeah. Or there's stuff like See Beyond. Draw 2 cards and shuffle a card from your hand into your library. Well, you shuffle on a land then. But like it's 2 mana, it's 1 in a blue, and at least you're again coming out ahead cards. You're not just replacing it, you're coming out actually 1 card ahead in that exchange. Or Latnem's Legacy does something similar. Like, there's a few of those effects here where you actually can come out cards ahead. Perilous Research, I believe, is the same thing. You sacrifice a permanent, but like, okay, so if it's turn 6, you sacrifice a mana rock or something, and you're going to still come out cards ahead. I would look at a few more of those things that put you 1 up to replace things like the quick change kind of effects here. So we also could have mentioned this in the same category here. So there's also that are just lumped as instants or sorceries, 6 of each. So we have Chaos Warp, Cyclonic Rift, Dramatic Reversal, Old School Fork, Snap, which return target creature to owner's hand and you untap 2 islands. That is a good value piece in this deck because you get your mana back for it.
Yep.
Teach by Example. Whenever you cast your next instant sorcery spell this turn, copy that and you can choose new targets for the copy. It's hybrid mana. There's a Gamble for 1 red, which you can tutor then have to discard. There's a Grape Shot, which makes sense in a Storm deck. Similarly, Mind's Desire, which is 6 mana, but you shuffle your library and exile the top card of your library until end of turn. You may play that card without paying its mana cost. There's a Past in Flames. There's a Mizzix Mastery, and there's a Vandal Blast here to blow up all artifacts.
Yep.
So instants and sorceries all in kind of one big lump. Any particular thoughts there, Chris? The one thing that jumps out at me is Teach by Example. There's a lot of red and quite a few blue spells for 2 mana that just cast or copy, or the copy an instant or sorcery spell. I was going to suggest a replacement for this one, but I guess one thing I do kind of like about it is its hybrid mana.
Yes, that's the one thing I'd like about it too, because I thought about the same thing.
Yeah, like it gives you so many more options to be able to cast this. You're like, I don't got to leave 2 blue up for Twin Cast or leave 2 red up for Reiterate or something. I can just leave 1 of each, and that's much easier to do in a deck where you're trying to cast 6 spells in a turn.
Yeah, I mean, and I like a card like this too, because you can bluff stuff. So you can be like, so say, knowing what your meta is and the people that you play with, you could be like a counter war type of deal, and it's like, okay, well, you cast that spell, you're going to draw a card. Well, I'm going to cast, Lead by or Teach by Example, make my Veyran a 4/4. And then the next one because I don't have to say which one I'm going to copy, just the next one.
Right.
So then I just leave that bluff out there. And let's say that you're holding an instant speed card draw thing. And they're like, okay, well, pass the turn. You're like, okay, well, I'm going to cast this spell and I'm going to copy this to draw, X amount of extra cards.
Right. The thing I would note is if you were to replace that with something like Reverberate just copies any instant or sorcery spell, whereas this is limited to yours.
Yes.
So I guess it comes down to be what is more useful for you, the ability to pick and choose how you want to spend mana on it. You want to spend, 2 blue, 2 red, or 1 of each. You can do that with Teach by Example, whereas Reverberate or Twin Cast, you're kind of hard locked to, double red or double blue. But it's nice hitting someone else's spell too. So I guess that's maybe personal preference.
And I consider those cards like in a deck like this, I would just consider them counter magic pretty much is how I would consider them. And then you could tweak the counter spell base.
Yeah. Whereas this can't be used to basically counter someone else's spell. So that's something to consider.
Yep. Now, the other thing I want to say about this, if you want to keep that teach by example, Dana did bring up a lot of the outlets of your finishers, and you could copy your finishers that would, even bigger thing, because you just cast one of the finishers with the teach by example, so you're casting it twice. I mean, that's huge. And you get the extra triggers, and oh my, that'd be 3 triggers? Ugh, yeah. That's gross.
Yeah, that's what I often wind up doing in that Kedis and Crom deck, is I swing at somebody and I'll play one of the red giant growth effects to make Crom into a 7/7, and then cast one of the damage doublers, and then copy that. Yep. So he'll go from 7 to 14 to 28. And then if there's, if Kedis happens to be in play, then that's just GG for everyone. See, those all make sense. The only one I don't think I love is Mind's Desire.
It's so expensive. I mean, I like it, but it's so expensive.
Yes. It's a super cool card, and when it works, it's almost always amazing, and it makes for a good story. But I've also seen enough times when it doesn't work.
Yes.
So
I have too, especially, so Storm count, so you're going to get what? Maybe 3 spells if you're lucky?
Yeah.
2 and then Mind's Desire.
It's a sorcery. It's not got to be on your turn, right?
Yeah, 2 and then Mind's Desire. So you're going to Storm 3 and maybe you whiff 1 out of 3 times. I mean, in a usual mana base. Well, if we combine this with the rocks, you're going to whiff X amount of times. So I don't know.
And there's also a lot of spells in here okay, so you've managed to cast Overmaster and Ponder. How big of a deal is that too?
Yeah.
I think the big hits I've seen with it, I think I saw in someone's Jaleva deck where it's built to cast stuff for free anyway. So the hits on that Jaleva deck wind up being crazy strong because it's running a bunch of 8 drops or 9 drops. Whereas here, I think even if it hits, and let's say you can cast it for 4 and you get 4 straight hits, there's a good chance they're all super unexciting spells.
Yeah, because so the way that this deck is built per se is to pump up Veyran and do all that stuff, and Mind's Desire, if you hit 2 of your creatures off the storm, they just come into play and you're just like, well, I'm getting no value out of this, and then someone board wipes you the next turn or lightning bolts off your creature or something, you get nothing out of it.
Yeah, but it's also the kind of card where if the game goes really long and you happen to draw this and you've got 3 spells in hand and you hit a couple more things, it's probably pretty easy to just roll Veyran up to 22 damage or something.
True.
If you have enough mana to get a few things out and whatever, So there's probably enough upside to be worthwhile. But so yeah, those are all things I mostly like. The enchantment, there's one enchantment here. It's 1,000-Year Storm. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell, copy it for each other instant sorcery spell you cast before at this turn, and you can choose new targets for the copy. It is 6 mana, which makes it probably slightly more efficient than Swarm Intelligence, which does something similar. I guess the more spells you cast in a turn, the better 1,000-Year Storm gets, but it doesn't do much for the first spell, whereas Swarm Intelligence just copies every spell.
Yep.
I'd be tempted to try both, but
I think it's one or the other. I don't think you can really get away with both of them.
You do not want a bunch of 6 or 7 mana enchantments in a deck for sure.
Yep. I would almost label 1,000-Year Storm as a finisher type of deal because, if you have enough spells to back it up, Veyran just gets huge, or, your electrostatic field goes off for a lot. And it seems like that should be a finisher as well.
The one thing I would maybe consider in that spot is Fiery Emancipation, which is 3 red, 6 mana. So same cost.
So gross.
If a source would deal damage, it deals triple that damage. And here's why. Yes, 1,000-Year Storm is probably better if you get 1,000-Year Storm down and you have a ton of mana in your hand and you can cast a bunch of spells and copy them all and roll up Veyran. What Fire Emancipation lets you do is it lets you just play it that turn and play 1 or 2 spells, and it's probably enough if it doesn't stick around to kill somebody.
Yep.
1,000-Year Storm probably needs more setup, and it's not the kind of spell you can cast it and then do something that turn to have it be lethal. You can have Fiery Emancipation. You can drop Fiery Emancipation and cast, your Ponder and your Preordain or something, and it's going to take Veyran up to a 4 and then a 6, and then you're going to hit somebody for 18.
I like that a lot better because then your Gutter Snipe, your Firebrand, and your Electrostatic Field are dealing triple damage.
Exactly.
So that's just another way of, getting outs of things that you need to do.
And there's also Gratuitous Violence that only works off creatures. It's not going to do things off a couple spells that might deal damage, although you don't have many spells in this deck that are dealing damage necessarily.
No.
But there's also gratuitous violence, but if you're going to spend that much mana, just run Fiery Emancipation in this deck. So I think that's going to basically do the 1,000-Year Storm thing better than 1,000-Year Storm.
I do too. The more that we talk about it, the more that it seems like that would just be better overall.
Well, so last but not least, there's 13 counters here, Chris. What do we have?
We have Deflecting Swat, Disdainful Stroke, Fierce Guardianship, Flusterstorm, Force of Negation, Force of Will, Mana Drain, Muddle the Mixture, Narset's Reversal, Negate, Pact of Negation, Remand, and Swan Song. And
those are all really good counter spells.
They are, all of them, aside from, probably the Disdainful Stroke, if I have to say anything. It's probably the weakest counterspell out of all of them in here.
I would agree. There are some decks, like I run Disdainful Stroke in one deck, because it's a deck where I primarily care about board wipes.
Yeah.
So like if there are other things I can get through, but like I want to stop every board wipe. It's in my Sphinx deck because I just can't. I can't lose a bunch of 9-drop Sphinxes, right?
Oh.
So like if I can stop board wipes efficiently, that's great. This deck isn't one where I think this deck you're much more concerned about things like fogs or targeted removal or counter spells, which this doesn't touch any of those.
Yeah, I mean, Arcane Denial maybe. I don't know in this type of format.
Well, so the one I was thinking was Stubborn Denial.
Oh,
so Stubborn Denial was a single blue,
okay.
And if you control it counters a spell or non-creature spell if unless your opponent pays 1, but if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, it just hard counters a non-creature spell. And if Veyran's out and you cast Stubborn Denial, you're going to get the trigger, and it's going to get triggered twice, so Veyran's going to be a 4 power.
Yep.
So as long as you have Veyran in play, Stubborn Denial is always going to be a better negate.
Yeah, because when it goes to check to resolve, I do believe that's how it checks.
Yep.
So yeah, that should work. If I'm wrong, all you judges out there can holler at me because I've been super wrong with rules lately.
Sure. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's correct with that one. The other one I like is a little bit more obscure, but I really have had good luck in my Kedison Crom deck with Bolt Bend. It is 3 and a red for an instant. Change the target of a spell or ability with a single target. However, the important part of text on here is this spell costs 3 less to cast if you control a creature with power 4 or greater.
Oh, that's really good. Wow. So a 1 red? Wow.
So 1 red. Now, unfortunately, unlike Stubborn Denial, where it does the check after you cast Stubborn Denial, which I'm fairly certain of. I guess let's say we could have been wrong, but I'm fairly certain it does the check afterwards. This doesn't. This checks beforehand. So you have to have already cast something to get Veyran up. But I'm guessing no one is removing Veyran during your upkeep. They're trying to remove Veyran after you've already cast a bunch of spells.
Yeah, they want you to blow everything you have and then hope they can catch you with your pants down.
Yeah. In which case, it's just a 1 red mana to not only keep your thing from getting killed, but it's swerving it onto something else. And again, it will also work with a counter spell. If someone goes to counter one of your spells, assuming Veyran is power 4 or greater, which is going to be super easy to do if you've cast something and they go to counter it, Veyran's already 4 or greater.
Yep.
So you've already hit that if you're using it as a way to stop a counter spell, and then you just redirect the counter spell to the Bolt Bend, and it is good enough that will stop that counter spell. So I've had really, really good luck with that card, and it's also like 25 cents. I think it's super cheap.
Yeah, I'm surprised not to see an actual counter spell in here. You have a mana leak you could probably run in here too, depending, because looking at how your deck is built, I'm assuming that everyone else's deck is probably similar. So mana leak, forcing them to have to pay 3 extra, could just straight up counter it. Yeah,
plenty of times, or delay even. Like,
yeah.
I guess Remand replaces itself by drawing you a card, which is nice, but they can just cast it again next turn. Or excuse me, they can cast it immediately because it goes to their hand.
Yep.
Delay at least makes it go away for 3 turns.
Yeah, there's other ones. The ones that put them on top or bottom of the library. I mean, stuff like that too you could run. There's a few that are just a little bit better. Like I like Muddle the Mixture, but I don't like Muddle the Mixture at the same time. Just because, it transmutes for 2, so it has to be at the 2. And I'm assuming whenever I ran Muddle, I immediately, transmuted for Cyclonic Rift. That's what it was in there.
Sure.
It was a second copy of Cyclonic Rift every single time.
I do think if you put in a couple of the damage doublers I suggested, Unleash Fury is 2 mana, so it's a way to go get that easily
nice.
if you are in a position where you can want to double damage and just take somebody out. Because the tutor on there is nice, and I would guess this is probably a situation where you're going to very often just be countering instant sorcery spells versus creatures, but yeah, I kind of agree. I'm torn on that one as well. The rest will look really good. I mean, like, if you want a super powerful control suite, this is it.
Yeah, I can't think of many more that are better than what's in here. Now, if you could run more than one copy, I mean, definitely. But
yeah. Okay, so I think that is probably going to wrap up taking a look at this deck. Thank you very much, Tyler, for sending it to us. This is, like I said, this is out of my wheelhouse, but it was fun to look at and try to think of things playing at that power level, because I just usually don't do that.
You know, Dana, we should build one of these one time. Just try to, build a
and just mess around, sure.
Yeah, I mean, see what we can do with it.
My Edric deck I would be okay running Edric into this. I would feel pretty comfortable with that. So I do have one, I guess, that's pretty close to that power level.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice just to have something so we're a little bit more versed on stuff like this.
And so when we encounter patrons like this out at shops, we have something that, or at tournaments or events or whatever, we have something that can play at that level too. So yeah, it's a good idea to have decks of all power levels if you're able to do so. I agree. All right, Tyler, thank you very much for sharing your deck with us. That was very cool. We appreciate it. We will be back next week with a show with Max. I am Dana. You can find me on the Twitterbirds at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show is edited by Rafael Garcia. You can find him at Ursa Bearwalker. And our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed to Creative Commons. Until next week, I'm Dana.
And I'm Chris.